Hey, Dmitrii, welcome to the Virtual CMO podcast. I'm very glad you could join us today.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great. We're going to get into talking a little bit about SEO today. You know, it's a common topic. We broach it often here on the podcast, but I also think it's confusing for many small businesses. And I'm hoping that you can shed some light on sort of what you need to do from an SEO perspective, as well as balancing that out with some design considerations for your website. But before we dive into all of that good stuff, I'd love it if you could just share a little bit with the audience about your background and how you came into the SEO business.
All right. Okay. So, uh, technically, by education, I'm a programmer
Okay.
and mathematician, really. I got my education in Russia, and I was studying applied mathematics in IT and coding, programming, and I kind of by chance got into SEO world. So there was a company, local company here in Houston, hiring PHP developers, and after a couple of weeks or maybe even days, they told me, you know what, we kind of don't need a PHP developer. We need somebody who does SEO, and they told me to figure it out or bust. And so I had to figure it all out. That's how I got seriously into it. Of course, I was playing with it even before then, just little freelance projects and stuff like that. But that's how I got to SEO as an actual job. And now, 10 plus years later, I run the agency in Houston area, in Houston, Texas, and we do great work.
Oh, that's great. You know, it's always interesting to hear people's paths and how they got to where they are today. And, you know, as we talk about this, I'd love to break it down sort of this way. So when we look at SEO holistically, I kind of break it into these three buckets. I look at technical SEO, you know, the what's underneath the covers. Is your website set up correctly? You know, do you have your schema? Do you have your H1 tags, your H2 tags, your metadata, all that kind of stuff that Google needs? And then I sort of put into a second bucket the great content that you produce, you know, whether it's your blog or whether it's the wording on your web pages, the keyword focus stuff, the things that Google
Right.
is really looking for so that you get that authority. And then in that third bucket, even though it's technical, I sort of put speed because now with Core Web Vitals and all of this emphasis on speed, we've really got to focus on that almost as an independent task. And I
Right.
think one of the things that's challenging is that we're also in this time when there's a lot of video, there's a lot of imagery. And so that conflicts with good content because video and imagery are not written words, right? That's not keyword focused. They also conflict in some ways with speed because the more of that you have on your website, it can slow down your website. So I'd love it if we could just break these apart and kind of talk about them one by one. And then as you look at website design, how do you balance all of this stuff out? So let's start with the technical SEO side.
All right. So that's a very good point that uh, nowadays you have to design for users, for humans, as well as search engines.
Yep.
And that's one of the biggest issues that is not typically being addressed by most website owners. So you're very much right that uh, the videos, which is engaging content, which is typically created for humans, is not really useful for SEO rankings and Google rankings and so on for search engines. And yes, it does slow down the page. So there are a few things that can be done from technical perspective, from content perspective, and so on and so on. So uh, and I can talk about this all day long. So you'll need to kind of stop me at some point.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. So basically, what we typically say is you always have to have the first viewport of the website, the first screen that the people see, has to be for people. Don't make it for search engines, and maybe even right below that, as if somebody scrolls down on your website, make sure that's also for humans. That's where you put your videos. That's where you put your main call to actions and like what the page is about and stuff like that. And below that, kind of the further the page you go, that's where you start introducing things for search engine, which is keyword optimized content, a lot of text, doesn't have to be necessarily a lot of images. It needs to look nice because people do read, but the main story there, the main thing there is to make sure that you captured your audience, you capture your users at the top of the page, and below down at the page, that's for search engines. You mentioned things like loading speed, for example.
Yep.
There are quite a few things that you should be doing regardless. For example, image optimization. You can upload like a 5,000 by 4,000 pixels image for mobile device, for example, that displays on mobile device. That makes no sense, right?
Yes.
So make sure that your images are optimized and they're correct size. There are things that is called lazy loading,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the image or really any content is not being loaded until a user scrolls almost all the way to it. It's maybe like there's a usually certain amount of pixels before a user gets to it. So
So
that will
this is
help you.
when you're going down the page,
Yeah.
it's instead of loading everything all at once, everything that's on that web page, it kind of loads it just in time. So if you
Yeah.
never scroll down to the bottom of the page, then it never even bothers loading that up.
Exactly, yeah. And that makes the website loads quicker. And at the same time, all of the text content, that loads regardless because that's pure HTML. And that for search engines works, and you don't have to worry about your rankings or anything like that. And in terms of videos and stuff like that, there are also many different ways to preload or rather post-load. So for example, it's typically a bad idea to have autoplays on the videos. Right? If you have some kind of YouTube embed or even like a background little video playing in the background, you have to really make sure that first the video again is optimized and its correct size, and that it's not some kind of 4K quality that you're trying to play in the background behind some kind of overlay that people can't really see anyway. So just make sure that videos are optimized, and then if it's actual video like embed from YouTube, make sure that it only loads when people click to play. Otherwise, again, it's going to start loading and going to slow everything down, and nobody's going to benefit from that.
Yeah, I think these are great tips. And, maybe you should explain a little bit about this. Core Web Vitals is something that Google has recently released, within this past year, and it's having impact on a lot of sites. What used to be a good page in Google's mind can now be a bad page if things don't load correctly. So maybe give us a little bit of a background in terms of what is it and what is the impact on SEO?
Right. So Core Web Vitals, there are 4 main metrics that Google is looking at. And there are things like, at the end of the day, it's how fast the page loads in different stages of loading. Google looks at, for example, the very first response from the server. Before, like typically, especially if you're on a very slow connection or a really bad optimized or not optimized website, you can sometimes see it. You go to the website and there's like a white screen, just doesn't show anything for a second or two before it starts showing something.
Yep.
So that's one of probably the worst things that you can do or not do to your website, because that's considered the time to first paint. That's what they call it. And basically, that's the whole idea is that nowadays everybody's so impatient. Everybody's used to, one day Amazon delivery, same day. I want it right now.
Yes.
There's a comedian I like. I forgot the name, Chan. Anyway, he has this bit about one day is too slow now. I want it right now. I want to give it to me before I even think it.
Yes.
So that's the whole idea there. And Google thinks about that, and they want to encourage website owners, businesses that can provide the best user experience. So make sure that whenever you are optimizing your website, you have it. Something needs to show pretty much immediately.
Yes.
And typically that's of course not going to be an image or video. It's going to be typically the text. So like the H1 tag, which is the main title of the page, that should show up pretty much right away, so that people understand that they are on the correct page, that the page is actually loading, being in the process of loading. I don't typically recommend those preloaders where it's like spinning wheel of fortune.
Right. The spinning beach ball.
Yeah. So because that also deters people from kind of it doesn't really tell you how long it's going to be spinning, so that's not the best idea either. So yeah, just at the end of the day, make sure that everything loads quick, and especially on mobile devices. That's where a lot of emphasis is happening right now, because everybody is using their phones for everything. Most industries are 80% or around 80% mobile devices are being used and browsed by from mobile devices, your iPhones and Pixels and so on and so on.
One thing, we had a guest on just a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about some of the great tools that Google's offers, whether it's the analytics or Google Search Console. And I know in Google Search Console, you can go in and you can actually see the health of your website. You can see exactly what it's looking at in terms of these core web vitals. But I think what's confusing for a lot of people, I've seen an awful lot of chatter about this on the internet, is if you go to Google Page Speed Insights and you test out your site, you can get great scores. And then you go into Search Console and you see what the report is on your website, and the scores are terrible.
Right.
Why is there that difference?
Well, okay. So those are actually two different things. The Page Speed Insights is its loading speeds, how fast the things on your website are loading. In Google Search Console, the errors there are very different. They are of technical nature, of indexability, of crawlability, of accessibility of your website. So when, like, how does Google work in general, the Google bots and whatnot? They try to get to your website and they try to look or crawl your page, and they want to understand what is on the page. Is there something broken there or not? And that's the typical errors in Google Search Console. There are what they call like a slow loading error, but that's kind of not really the same as core web vitals or what you get from Page Speed Insights. That is, they are connected, but it's not the same at all. So typically, you should be using those tools for different reasons. You use Page Speed Insights, core web vitals for loading speeds, and then for your technical issues, if Google or any other search engines can't access your website properly, or some pages are not loading correctly, or maybe some links are broken, something like that. That's what you use Google Search Console for, and you fix your sitemaps and other things there, or it tells you about that there.
Yeah, no, understood. I guess I'm referring to specifically the Core Web Vitals section of Google Search Console, where it kind of breaks that down a little bit. And my understanding was one of the reasons that it's a lagging indicator is because that uses the Chrome Experience Report. And so if you don't have enough website traffic specifically using Chrome, that it just takes a long time for it to gather the data in order to sort of update that, where Page Speed's Insights, it's just a one and done.
Right. So they those tools are not kind of talking to each other, which is also a weird thing. You know, you think that it's the same company, the same people, so they kind of have the same data in multiple places, but it's not. So in Google Page Speed Insights, when you go to Page Speed Insights tool, the data that they're looking at there, it is kind of like a database almost. So sometimes, especially if you have a smaller website, if you're a small business owner, they will not have any core web vitals data for your website at all, because there are certain thresholds that basically only gather websites or data when they have enough metrics and so on and so on. So if you have, couple dozen people going to your website, or even a couple hundred people going to your website in a month, you're not going to see that. In Google Search Console, that's typically as long as it's installed properly, that is your website as it performs on a daily basis. So in that regard, you kind of need to look at the errors and the issues that are being reported in PageSpeed Insights tool, even though it's not Core Web Vitals, because it will tell you your score. Is it 60 out of 100 or whatever? And then they will tell you what you need to optimize. So that's what I typically say you have to pay attention at first, because some people kind of go after the score themselves or the Core Web Vital number itself, but they forget about the idea of it. It's just an indicator. It's like, okay, something is not loading right, or you shouldn't be going after the numbers. You should be going after the results. And at the end of the day, especially if you're talking about big websites, big projects, apps, and so on, you should be doing real live testing, like on actual devices with different connection speeds and so on and so on. So that's the proper way. And again, just take all those numbers and metrics with a bit of a grain of salt, and rather look at what slows you down rather than trying to get that 0.1 second of the first paint or something like that.
I think that's a great point, because it does give you an overall score on the page speeds insights, but that's not at all what shows up in Google Search Console. It is really looking at those paint scores. And that seems to be, as you said, the biggest indicator that Google is looking at right now. And I'm also interested to dive in a little bit more around your comment with mobile. You're exactly right. So many businesses, the majority of their web traffic now is coming through mobile devices. So we talk about responsive web design, being able to look at a website on multiple platforms, multiple screen sizes. When you advise clients on SEO and really helping make their websites better, what are some best practices that you look at for mobile devices? Do you recommend just stripping out as much as you can and it's mostly text-based? How do you keep the same web experience while making those load times even faster?
Right. You shouldn't be stripping everything down. Well, it depends on the industry. If you are in some kind of like a news industry where you provide just articles of like text news style articles,
Yes.
then sure, you might want to strip down as much as you can and kind of present it almost like a newspaper format, and maybe have one or couple images that are optimized and so on. But if you're, let's say, I don't know, like selling shoes, you want those pictures, you want those the product images, whatever you sell. Otherwise, it's not going to make any sense.
Yes.
Things that are helpful for the user. The main thing is user experience. That's what people tend to kind of misunderstand, I guess.
Sure.
It's not about loading speed itself. It's about user experience. The loading speed is one of those factors, but in a lot of cases, sure, if your website loads in like a half a millisecond, but then it's all messed up and doesn't make any sense, and you can't find where to click and what to look at, people are going to hate the website, they're going to leave, and therefore you're going to lose the rankings. So it's a balance of load something as quick as possible, which is typically that first viewport, what we call. And then in the background, while people are browsing, you need to load things so that it looks very good, that it provides the best user experience, that none of the information is missing. And let's say if we're talking about products, you want to show things like specifications of the product and maybe dimensions and I don't know, like some kind of warranties, whatever else. You still should show it all on mobile. You just need to load it so that it doesn't affect the user experience. And that's where the things like lazy loading or preloading or post-loading and so on comes in. And sometimes you might want to separate that into different pages. Or so if you have just little buttons, check more specifications for this product, and it takes you to a different page that also can be preloaded before even people click on that. So yeah, it's not about the scores, it's about the experience. And what I typically recommend is whenever you have a website, for any business owner, really, give it to a kid, like a
Yeah.
young enough kid, but I don't know, 5 years old or something like that. Somebody who understands what you want them to do. It's like, hey, can you go to this and find me some kind of shoe, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and then just see how they interact with it. And then after that, give it to your grandma or grandpa who are 80 years old or something like that, and then ask them the same question. Just look at that, see what they do, how they do it, and after that, it's going to be very clear where the big glaring issues are. Are they clicking on something that they think it's clickable but it's not, or can they not figure out that, let's say, one of the section is meant to be scrollable, like to the side, but there's no indicator of any source that it is scrollable, or something of that nature. And just by observing real people, especially in those groups that is kind of on the edge of the perception, then that's where you can learn a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced websites where buttons are too small, or they're off the page, or maybe the site has a pop-up and you can't get rid of it on mobile because some
Yeah.
part of the
Oh,
frame
yeah.
is off there. It's just really understanding that. I love the way you put the focus on customer experience, because that's truly what it's all about. You want people to be able to experience your website in a way that is equal no matter what device they're on. One of
Right.
my huge pet peeves, we talk about it on the show a lot, is how many companies are so poor working with browsers autofill functions. When you're on a
Mhm.
mobile device, you really don't want to type that much. You want as much
Right.
to be pre-filled as possible. And when you disable that or haven't enabled it, it can be a real frustration to users. If it's simply just putting in their name and address, that can be a big pain.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And kind of other couple of things that I'd like to mention for mobile devices specifically. Unfortunately, so there's this AMP,
Yes.
the AMP technology
Yep.
that allows kind of stripped down version of pages, and unfortunately, I see a lot of that being overused incorrectly, especially in visual industries. Like, let's say you are a I don't know, like a company that produces nice banners, like the one behind me. All right,
Uh-huh.
the like where you use for trade shows and whatnot. It's very visual. You want to
Yep.
see all those pictures of products and how they're being used and whatever else. That is the main reason why people go to your website. If you strip that off, what's the point? People don't read. Nowadays, nobody reads text.
Right.
They
Right.
just want to watch a video or they want to look at pictures. So you have to think about intent. And that's a whole completely different conversation I can talk for 2 days straight about. But user intent. Why are people going to your website? And specifically when they're going to a given page, whatever that page is, why they are coming to that page, or what they're coming to that page for. What are they expecting? And you have to kind of reverse engineer all that stuff and give the answers for the questions people are looking to be answered for to be answered. Um, give those answers right away at the top of the page, especially on mobiles, and then everything else you still want to have on your page. Just push it down, rearrange it on mobile. That's all it takes. And as long as you again use the lazy loading or something, it's going to be fine.
Do you think there's a future to the AMP pages, or do you think they're going away? It kind of seems like Google's abandoning it.
I think I don't know about Google themselves, because it's still being used a lot in kind of like the news type of industry. Things like any virtual newspapers or publications or buzz feeds of the world. It's very much being used there a lot still, and it does help. And what I typically recommend for businesses that are service businesses or product businesses, use it, but use it on blog pages.
Mm.
Blogs that are in that narrative style where there is not a lot of imagery or videos required. Top 5 tips for blah blah blah. Okay, just it's bullet point list. You don't have to have all the crazy images and whatever else. Now, if it's some kind of like a DIY guide to replacing your roof, then yeah, you probably want to put a lot of images and videos and everything else and make it very useful for the user. And for that, obviously, don't use AMPs. So again, just a lot of this stuff is very common sense. The way what Google wants is provide the answer in the quickest possible way.
Yes.
And that's why they introduced things like the zeroth result, right? Where they give you the answer before you even go anywhere. They just put it at the top of the Google results page.
Right, which
That's
is great.
yeah. That's why they're introducing things like the little snippets that are kind of like, even if you click on that result, it takes you to a specific part of the page, and they kind of highlight it in yellow, like stuff like that. So what they want is, if you think about Google business model, they want more and more people to use their search engine. So if you can get an answer very quickly for whatever question you have as a user, you're going to come back to the search engine and ask more and more questions. So that's why Google introducing or encouraging behaviors that are helping users to find answers quickly and right answers. That's all it is. It
Yeah.
just common sense type of situation.
That's very interesting. And, the AMP was such a big thing a while ago, and they have seemed to de-emphasize it. And I believe they're no longer counting it against you if you don't have AMP optimized pages
Yeah.
where they were for a while.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the reality of the world that we live in, that things are constantly changing, which is one of the reasons there are so many SEO companies, and they provide such a valuable service. So as we kind of bring the interview to a close here, if a business is struggling a little bit, if they're not getting the web traffic that they want, they're not getting those sort of organic results that they want, what should they look for in an SEO company, and what should they expect from an SEO company?
Okay. Do you have about 2 weeks to go through this?
I'll take the short version.
Okay. Short version. Okay, there come kind of two parts of the question.
Yep.
What should they be looking for in SEO company? In my mind, it's always transparency. What you're going to do for me and how it should affect the results.
Okay.
That's really the reason why we created our own company, because we've ran across so many different companies, SEO companies, where they offer SEO plans. Hey, no matter who you are, here's 3 different plans, choose from it. Well, if you're a lawyer or a dentist, the approaches are completely different.
Sure.
If you're e-commerce or service, approaches are completely different. So it needs to be targeted to your business, or tailored rather to your business. You need to understand how that company is going to be helping you and your business specifically.
Yes.
So transparency, data, kind of projections and predictability to some extent. Of course, we can't guarantee what's going to happen with Google tomorrow, but based on experience and data and metrics, you can tell, at least with certain degree of certainty, with high degree of certainty, what should happen. Also, another thing that I highly not even suggest, but it's almost like a must, is progress. Of course, nobody can get you to the first page organic rankings tomorrow. However, you should be able to see progress, whatever that progress is. Are you getting 2 more visits in a day, in a week, than you were before?
Mm-hmm.
Are you getting 1 more lead in a week than you were before? If you're hiring for technical optimization, is your page loading 0.1 second quicker than a couple days before, or stuff like that, right? And just kind of like you can even ask for itemized list of what's been done,
Yes.
like a log of work. So that's what you kind of should be looking for when you talk to SEO company. And as for what in general should be done, if you're talking about how to get to the first page of Google, really it's the 4 buckets or 4 sections. Content is always king, as we say in the industry. If you're not talking about puppies, then you're not going to be ranking for puppies.
Right.
If you're talking about something else, then so content. The other one is technical optimization, which we kind of covered in quite a lengthy way today. The third one is user experience, which is related to technical, but not necessarily. User experience is more about behavior, while technical is more about those metrics. And then the fourth big section is backlinks, and that's one of those snake oil salesman industry that a lot of people don't understand, or try to, like the sellers of those backlinks try to kind of they bring bad rep to the industry, but at the end of the day, backlinks are just recommendations from other websites. That's all it is. If another website links to you, they should be recommending you for the service that you provide, as long as it's in the same industry, as long as it's topically relevant. That's all you need to know. That's all you should care about, rather.
Building that credibility and domain authority. Yeah, it's so important, but you're right. A lot of snake oil salesmen out there pushing, building backlinks.
Yeah.
Dmitrii, this is good. I love your focus on the user experience. I think that's really great. Where can people find out more about you and your company on the web?
All right. So my company is called Regex SEO, Regular Expressions SEO. That's our website, regexseo.com. And if anybody would like to reach out to me directly, you can find me on social medias. And my handle is @digital_spaceman. We are in Houston, NASA, space, and our industry is all about reaching new heights. So yeah, Digital Spaceman.
I like that. And the backdrop is a perfect match for that.
Yeah. There you go.
This is, like I said, it's a conversation we have a lot on this podcast, but it's one of the most important things I think you can do for your business. And so it's good to dive into the details. And it was great to get your perspective on this. Dmitrii, thanks so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me.